Hi, my name is Ricardo. I would like to start today talking about common sense. But to get it started, I would like to take off from a quote from a couple of American sociologists whose work is based in turn on European philosophers and so on and so forth. They say that reality is socially constructed. I would piggyback on that idea, on that notion, but I would modify it a bit. I would say that reality is culturally reconstituted by the way we think. Meaning that if the social edifice is sound, or rather is harmonious, then the reasoning is sound, and vice versa. If the social edifice is dissynchronized or disarticulated or broken, then the reasoning is unsound or deeply flawed. You might say, well, which is it? Well, people would say, well, it depends whom you ask. Well, if you ask me, I would say that we are living in an age of crisis. This means that whatever thrust us to the point that we are is running out of fuel. It's coming to the end of its cycle, and we're in the throes of a crisis of deep-seated changes. This is the way I look at it. The last thrust was given with enlightenment. Enlightenment is the age of reason, and it in turn based its hypothesis on the notions gotten from the Renaissance. It's a long-winded idea, and I've developed in 4 of my books actually, especially the last one, Reconstitution, which kind of wraps it up. But it started with Triads, with subtitled PreSocratic Origins of Dialogical Science, then Universalization, Instituting Education as a third social protagonist of culture, and Dialogics. So it's a bit long-winded. What I've done instead is borrow from these 2 great paintings. On my left here is called the School of Athens, painted in 1510 in the Renaissance by Raphael. It's in the Vatican. And later on, about 200 years afterwards, this one on my right, painted by, this is the canvas, that's a fresco. This one was painted back in 1789, more or less, by Jacques David, around at the beginning of the French Revolution, or around that time. It's called the Death of Socrates. So this is the School of Athens, and this is the Death of Socrates. And I mention these because these are the 3 main figures that we associate the cradle of civilization. Okay? Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. The interpretation that we have of this painting of the School of Athens is that it is telling us that the cradle of the West, this was painted in the Renaissance, the cradle of the West is Athens. And the pre-Socratic philosophers, all the people around Plato and Aristotle, are like background to their ideas. And Greece didn't come into its own proper until we arrived with Athens, which pretty much are the systemic philosophers of Plato and Aristotle. My claim is that that's not accurate. My claim is that the cradle of civilization actually was 200 years before, with the pre-Socratics, the ones that are around, surrounding Plato and Aristotle. And we're talking about the 3 schools of thought, Thales of Mileto, or the Milesian school, or cosmological. Then there's the Eleatic school by Xenophanes of Colophon, though the primary figure was Parmenides of Elea. That's why they call the Eleatic school. And most or foremost would be Pythagoras as well. Pythagoras wasn't a school, properly speaking. It was more like a religious sect, or nobody's very clear because they swore secrecy. In any case, the short version that I have is that Plato and Aristotle, or the systemic philosophers, base themselves on what Aristotle called the 3 laws of thought: the law of identity, the law of non-contradiction, and the law of the excluded middle. This third law, especially the law of the excluded middle, will pretty much shut the idea that the PreSocratics had, because the PreSocratics had the idea of triads, that everything was made up of three. There were two whistleblowers within the Pythagoreans, Ion of Chios, who said that the virtue of everything is a triad, not two, not three, but triad, made up of strength, intelligence, and luck. What we call today body, mind, and spirit. You know, in my lexicon, that's how I understand it. The other whistleblower was I forgot. I'll tell you later. He said that everything is made up of unlimiteds, of limiters, and limiteds, unlimiteds, and limiters, which is the same idea. Okay, the unlimiters, or the unlimiteds are the spirit. The limiters will be the body, and the unlimiteds and limiters will be what we call the mind. Okay, some kind of a combination, what I call second story construction. So, in my opinion, the cradle of the West was 200 years before and based on the triads. However, the civilization that we have right now of the West, as I said, is based on the ideas of the Renaissance thinkers as portrayed in this painting, and they said that the cradle of civilization of the West, rather, is Plato and Aristotle, or Athens, which is the systemic philosophers, properly speaking. And from there, enlightenment takes off, and we are at the end of the throes of enlightenment. That's why we have this crisis of civilization. That's how I attribute the situation that we have right now of crisis. That we hit upon the wrong cornerstone, all right? Or rather, we need to go to the cornerstone. And what might this cornerstone be? Well, on this picture on the right, with the bottom one, a close-up view, it portrays pretty much my idea of the triads. Triad would be this, the spirit. The right hand would be the body, taking the hemlock, and you, the viewer, have to make up the hypotenuse, and that makes the triad. So this Jacques David is doing a critique of this, and its own neoclassical painting, which was very symbolic. I interpret it that way, that he is saying that Socrates was somehow connected with the background around these Plato and Aristotle. In other words, the triad is reconfigured here with Socrates. In my opinion, then, the cornerstone of the West isn't the either-or way of thinking of either this of Plato or this of Aristotle, but rather the both and of Socrates, which takes us back to the idea of the triads of the pre-Socratic period. If we do that, then we would be well on our way of solving the crisis of civilization that we have right now, and putting that, but we would still need to put that cornerstone on bedrock, because by itself it's great, better than the false one we have, or the tricky one that we have right now of the either or, which is not a cornerstone, is more like a dualism of two opposites. We would be well on our way. But as I said, that cornerstone would have to be cemented on rock. So then, in conclusion, I say that common sense has been corrupted by these two characters of Plato and Aristotle with their either-or way of thinking, and that has penetrated so much into the social fiber that we only think in terms of duals, okay? But let me remind you that that is precisely the language of machines, zeros and ones, okay, of programming. And that's great, yeah, but for machines, we are human. And humans, the characteristic feature is freedom. In other words, we apparently are determined by two opposites like tweezers, like Chinese chopsticks, but actually we have that great ability of transcending to a second story, so to speak. So that the triad idea is these two determine us, okay, they're opposites, contraries, either this or this. But the either and would be both these and the hypotenuse, which is a second story idea, and that is precisely what transcends it. So what I'm getting at here is that we need to regain our common sense, and that's all we need. a common sense that we have to learn a la Socrates, and a common sense that we have to unlearn, a corrupted one of Plato and Aristotle, and we need to learn a clean one of thinking in terms of triads. And common sense is all we need to reconstitute the beautiful, wonderful world we live in. Thank you very much.